Everfree Guardian, Chapter 7, Part 2. Standing up, Rarity was the first to approach Nate, bringing him into a silent hug as she leaned into him. There were no words, no hushed whispers, she just remained, coaxing him into embracing her back while Fluttershy floated over and joined the hug from above. Applejack grinned, before doing the same, squeezing them all together firmly against her before softening her grip. With his arms still around Rarity, he felt their warmth sink into his body, relaxing and melting him into their embrace. Eventually, Fluttershy pulled back and smiled down at him, her face saying everything there is for him to hear. He has a family. After all of this time, he does. It's small, but it's wholesome, and finally one that he can accept and be a part of. Hugging all the girls again, he was unaware of Fluttershy's smile turning wry. When he finally did notice, he rose an eyebrow. All she did was point up and reveal a mistletoe just above them. Needless to say, the fashionista and farm mare held him down while Fluttershy had her way with him. She showed a surprising amount of boldness that night, despite never actually getting sexual with the intimacy. The rest of the night was spent together, now more relaxed and slowly turning in for the night. Nate had slept on the floor, leaning up against his own bed while the girls took in for the night. That night, that day, it was one of the most emotional and magical days of Nate's life. One with more purpose than flesh-tearing and life-saving. All of that, plus some uneventful days to come, led to today, where the winter had passed and spring was coming in. Nate had only wished that he had graced spring under better circumstances, especially now that he stood with Fluttershy, Applejack, and Rarity at the latter's favorite spa. The girls had finally managed to convince their human into coming here as a friend's night out, whatever that meant. He knew what a trip here would come to. He'd have to reveal a bit of himself to those three as well as the staff. Hopefully, he didn't have to undress himself in front of the latter. God help him if they figured out he wasn't a pony. Oddly enough, Nate didn't have as big of an issue in revealing more of himself to the girls. After the night he confessed his fears, he was willing to expose more skin around them. He hadn't seen his own face for as long as he can remember. He had watched it, kept it as spick and span as he could, but he knew it was just as damaged as the rest of his body. So long as he kept his face hidden from view, he was alright joining the girls in the bath, strange as that may be due to his customs clashing with Equestria's. But that's neither here nor there. Coming into the spa with the three, he was introduced to Lotus and Aloe, two Earth Pony twins that were definite sweethearts but loved to tease and flirt when the air was light between them and their customers and known guests. Thankfully, they didn't try anything on Nate that would require them getting too close, and soon enough he found himself before a jacuzzi with Fluttershy, Rarity, and Applejack all getting undressed beyond a curtain. He didn't feel entirely uncomfortable revealing more skin to the girls. He trusted them, knew that they wouldn't just run when seeing him in his full nude glory. If anything, they wouldn't even be paying attention to anything inviting. No, he knew right from the moment they got into that jacuzzi with him several seconds later that they would be focused on something else. Oh dear lord. Fluttershy, Applejack, and Rarity had finally, after several minutes of undoing and tossing clothing to the side, made it back to the spa's main bathhouse to join the human. They weren't expecting him to join them. With how guarded he is about showing anything underneath his clothes, they thought that he'd be sitting off to the side, basking in the heat rolled over by the steam, relaxing in his own grace. They found him inside the jacuzzi they rented out when they entered, finding it surprising that he was going so far. It warmed their hearts to know how much he trusted them to let them see him, and not the darkness that he hides himself in. With the exception of the towel wrapped around his head, his entire body was exposed to them. Upon seeing it though, that warmth was met with a chill when they saw his back, as he was facing away from them and resting his chin and arms on the edge of the tub. Fluttershy, out of all of them, knew that they'd see a lot of damage on Nate's body. Given all he's went through, the amount of injuries that he sustained, how could his body be smooth and clean? She could at least say it was healthy. Despite its state of disrepair, the human had been taking extreme care to nurture what remains after those battles and trials in the Everfree forest. What haunted her the most was the giant gash on his back. It hadn't healed as it should have. Whereas all the other scars on his back shone as ugly gray and pink lines, the one that he sustained from Gilda's assault stayed open. The flesh was no longer bleeding and appeared to be as healthy as the skin that once laid over it, but it was still out in the open, hardened by exposure to outside elements. What made the shy Pegasus sick the most was the little bit of spine still visible from the wound. Applejack and Rarity saw the same thing, stopping in their tracks to see what Nate's own carnage wrought onto his immortal flesh. "You all gonna stand there all day?" The three blinked out of their funk when they heard him speak, seeing him tilting his head slightly to the side to glance back at them. Fluttershy was the first to dip in, sitting off towards Nate's left on the other side of the jacuzzi. Rarity and Applejack came into his right and straight across from him respectively, all still having their eyes on him. "I assume you all see my scars? And the wounds?" Fluttershy reached out, caressing one of the lesser scratches below his ribs.
Oh my goodness. Nate, was all of this from Equestria?
He rubbed a few with his right hand, which shared many of the scars and cuts up his forearm and bicep. No, most of my scars came from before, back when I was on Earth. Lots of bad business, that was. He gently grabbed Fluttershy's hand, turning it so he was holding her fingers tenderly. I wanted you to see the back first, to ease you into what you'll see. When I turn around, you'll know my other reason for keeping myself sealed away. Why I rarely let other people look at me. Are you ready for that? Will you judge me if you see it? Fluttershy could feel his hand shake slightly at that last question, getting her heart to forget the fear of him and instead embrace kindness. She took his hand with both of hers, pressing it gently at the top of her breasts.
Oh, Nate, we've known each other for 5 months. That may not seem like a long time for most ponies, but we've grown so close to each other. I know you. No matter what you look like, I cherish you. And so does some of Ponyville.
Applejack nodded, setting her Stetson hat off to the side.
I'll second that, Sugar Cube. Y'all have been the biggest bunch of help with manpower on my farm since you showed up in our little town. I can't think of you any less if you look something that belongs in the Everfree.
Rarity smiles, chuckling as she fanned herself.
Darling, I've seen parts of you that no mare has ever seen before, and I think we both know what I mean.
Nate snorted as she softened her gaze.
Be that as it may, you have risked yourself time and time again for us all, dear. It doesn't matter what you look like to us or even what you are. Here in Ponyville, you are as every bit of a stallion as the rest. Perhaps even one of the best that I've known myself, and that's saying quite a lot.
The human shook his head at that comment, knowing from all of Rarity's stories and gossips that she fancies a lot of popular figures. One of which being this royal prince known as Blue Blood. Apparently he's supposed to be the world's iteration of Prince Charming. Supposedly, Rarity has a lead on where she can meet him, and plans to court him. More power to her, they'll celebrate with drinks if she succeeds. But back to the present, Nate gives a slow breath as he leans up. Alright, if you're absolutely sure, then... Okay. He rises in the tub, standing so that the water is at his knees. Already they can feel and see something wrong. Bits and pieces of him were hanging off of his lower body's front. Nothing was in the actual water itself, but it was enough to make the mare's heart sink. Turning towards him slowly, they now understood why he wore those clothes all the time. Nate's body was a damn horror autopsy. To start, his body had retained the enormous gash and the 2 bullet wounds from when he first arrived in the kingdom. That was old news to them. What was new was everything else. Nate's left forearm down was completely skinless, looking as if someone violently ripped off a few layers of it like scratchy duct tape. His fingernails remained, and some of that skin was loose, dangling from where it was bordered at his elbow. His right bicep had a large indent in the side, likely from a bladed object, that was just as light crimson as the slice on his back. The rest of his arm was better than the left, but it wasn't saying much. It still retained all of its skin, but was no less scarred than the rest of him. His calves held the same treatment as his right bicep, having parts of it removed and stabbed into, bullet wounds present here and there as well. His chest and belly faced even worse treatment than his limbs. Several places were open, revealing protected organs and ribs. If they looked hard enough, they could see a very small glance of his beating heart. But what freaked them out the most was his neck. His neck had a ring of red going around it as if he had worn an iron collar for years on end and it tore away at it before being taken off. It was stained with black blood that dried years ago, remaining as a smudge upon his natural tan. Was this as a result of some sort of slavery? Torture? The answers remained unclear as the scar was too broad to give an accurate assumption. Fluttershy was the first to respond, bringing her hands up to her mouth as Applejack's face had gone stone cold, paling to a brighter shade as she gazed upon his body in utter disbelief. She couldn't believe that he's endured so much to become this. Hell, she couldn't believe he was even alive. Rarity was the only one to voice her thoughts, at first crying out in shock before spouting stuttering concerns for the human, reaching out and touching around his scars and dried up injuries. Nate only stood there, flexing his fingers gently before gruffly replying to their shock. Well, here I am. This is what remains after everything that I've been through. His head tilted downwards, giving the impression of submission as his shoulders seemed to shiver. Are you going to run? Are you scared of me now that you see the real me underneath the clothes? Fluttershy lowered her hands from her mouth, realizing that her nature had made her reel back from the human. Coming to her senses quickly, she stood up to Nate's height, quickly giving his whitened cheek a reassuring kiss. The tormented guardian blinked, surprised and completely thrown off that Fluttershy would still touch him after what she'd seen. Turning his head to look at her, Fluttershy smiled as she gazed into Nate's shadowed face.
Never. We meant what we said. It doesn't matter what you are. You still made life better for all of us.
She giggled as she pulled away, placing a hand on her heart.
Why, I can't even think of the last time my own home had been so lively since you came along.
Rarity and Applejack agreed as Nate looked to them, feeling the presence of a familial warmth that he'd long forgotten. Smiling, he could feel a wetness trickle down his obscured face, drizzling onto the towel.
Thank you. All of you. I can't remember the last time.
He shook his head, hugging the shy Pegasus earnestly.
Thank you.
Fluttershy unfurled her wings, bringing them around her human as Rarity and Applejack joined the hug, the awkwardness forgotten in the wake of their bond, as friends growing ever so closer. Releasing each other from their grasps, they stood apart, smiling and actually enjoying themselves for a change. They began to rest back into the water, Nate coming in last. As he found himself back in a spot, Applejack decided to lighten the mood with a bit of humor.
You know, you're bigger than most fellas around here.
Oh, shut up. Later that night, Nate had departed after his evening was spent in the company of his friends. After the hour-long run to the spa, the four had left feeling more refreshed and clean than they'd ever felt before, the human especially. He couldn't remember the last time that he'd felt so fresh, so alive. With the many scars and holes on his body, he always felt some semblance of pain or aches, but that spa not only flushed him out of the fluids that seeped from his pores and exposed innards, but relaxed the muscles that he normally had guarded. He felt peaceful. After leaving the spa, the quartet went out for dinner, choosing a nice homey diner to continue relaxing in as they enjoyed a hot meal. In the time that they were in that diner, Nate began to learn more about each of his three friends. Specifically how they got their cutie marks, which apparently designates one's special talent and appears on their ass cheeks.
Kind of a weird place to put it, but whatever.
Applejack's cutie mark appeared via a journey to find herself. In her youth, she had no interest in being a farm pony, so she tried to move in with her relatives in Manhattan and make it in the big city. After seeing how restrictive and polished the city life was like, especially one that resembled Earth's New York, Applejack realized where her place in life is meant to be. Upon returning to the farm, her cutie mark appeared, and her special talent was not only taking care of her farm, but readying it for the next pony who was gonna take care of it. It seemed the Apples were a family that prided themselves on successors and strong children. No wonder all of them were with ponies. Rarity's was a bit more comical. She was a fashionista her whole life. It was her aspiration, her dream. When most found her work to be average and only just, she was distraught and fresh out of ideas on how to spruce up her dresses and costumes to make them really flare. Her horn had an idea and dragged her halfway across the damn country just to present her to a rock. Sure enough, within that rock was layers upon layers of gemstones. Using them, her work improved, and her special talent in the fashionista business was unveiled to the world. Fluttershy's was the one that put two stallions on his shit list. While no names were dropped, it appeared Fluttershy's time in her home city, Cloudsdale, wasn't a happy one. Her lack of speed and usual Pegasus grandeur came from a tough upbringing. Her shy nature and lack of confidence did little to help her pass flight school. And after a subsequent fight engaged a race between her best friend Rainbow Dash and the bullies, she was thrown off of Cloudsdale and plummeted right into the outskirts of Ponyville, which just so happened to be where she set up shop for a cottage. Ever since then, she remained as a caretaker for the critters. Her cutie mark appearing several days after she uncovered her unique ability to communicate with them on levels other ponies and even Nate can't attain. Nate had shared a bit of his own past as well. Not anything sensitive, mind you, rather he shared details on Earth and the particular region that he was from. He grew up in Manchester, England, and was born from an English mother and an American father. Later on, he had a sister right around when he turned 5, and his bond with her grew more and more as the years passed. Sadly, that was the extent of the information that he could give. Going further would plunge him into the darker veils of his past, how he'd gotten so many scars and why he acts and suffers the way he does. He didn't want to ruin the mood that they had going, and figured straying to the technological advancements Earth and humanity had made would be a better topic than personal tales. It seemed to work, as the more he told about computers and the internet and even how humanity went to the moon, it captivated the girls entirely. Sometimes the topic of humanity would stray to animals or fashion, to which Nate answered as best as he could in those fields, but all in all his world wasn't so different compared to Equestria, aside from the obvious. After they were done eating, they went their separate ways, bidding each other farewell and a good night. Nate returned to his hideout with little trouble. Nothing in the Everfree was stirring, nor were there any predators hunting for game. The night was old, and undoubtedly the time was late as well. Some well-earned sleep would do great justice for the Guardian, especially after he'd unwound himself in the company of his friends. Crashing on his couch without an effort to take off his clothes, he was well off into his own dreamland by the time the moon had reached its peak. However, as the night continued and crawled towards a morning dawn, his slumber was interrupted by a voice, an echo. Sitting up, he looked around his home, finding nothing out of the ordinary. None of the furniture was disturbed, nothing was missing, not even the magical flasks were reacting to anything around them. Standing from his couch, he went to one of the windows, pushing it open to peek outside into his cavern. Imagine his surprise when he found the ground growing popcorn-covered weeds, the moat around his house was layered with cotton candy, and the holes leading up to the surface where sunlight shone through was raining in chocolate milk.
What the fuck?
I was just about to say, man, he finally got a break, and he did. But the morning right after, he has to deal with Discord now. Ah, the poor guy. Anyways, let's get on to our luckier donators. Top donators are 630, J10 Man, Darkside, Only One Thing, and Ceru Orion. Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin Roland, Stu Hex, or Brother and Morgan, Omicron Lyre, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Hadzaza, Riot Soul, Iron Sky, Badass Waffle, Shadow Moon, Luigi88, and many more fantastic people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.